Young and the Restless Spoilers Wednesday reveals Phyllis is facing a crisis, causing her to lose control of the wheel, leading to a serious accident. A crisis that continues to unfold, causing Daniel to panic and cry when he sees his mother seriously injured. Phyllis's breakdown is making things worse. Phyllis Summers stood in her office, eyes fixed on the newly received notice, a feeling of despair rising in her heart. Losing her job at Abbott Communications was not only a career shock to her but also a loss of all the power she had built up for so long. While the bright spots in Phyllis's career had lasted for many years, now, everything suddenly became dim, like a nightmare with no end. The entire city of Genoa City came to a standstill as news of Phyllis Summers' horrific accident spread quickly. Phyllis, a woman who was always tough, strong, and confident in every situation, suddenly became the victim of a tragic car accident. A car collided with her on her way home, and the car crashed into a utility pole before bursting into flames. The scene left witnesses in disbelief. Everything happened so fast, but it was enough to completely change Phyllis's fate. A car was speeding down a deserted road. Phyllis, exhausted and tired after a long stressful day, was stopping at a crossroads, thinking about everything that had happened in her life. But before she could prepare for the terrible things that were about to happen, the accident happened. In the blink of an eye, the car lost control and hit her, throwing her far away before the car burst into flames. Phyllis's screams echoed in the darkness, but everything around her seemed to fade away. No one could have predicted the severity of this accident, especially after the recent events. Phyllis had just faced the pain of being fired by Billy Abbott, a huge shock to her. The constant stress, the stress of work and personal life had begun to push her into a state of mental breakdown. Billy had not only taken away the business she had built up over the years, but also made her feel like she was being thrown away, worthless. Meanwhile, Daniel, Phyllis's son, was in another location in the city. He had just received information about the accident and could not believe his ears. With a heart full of fear, he rushed to the scene where his mother's car had caught fire. Unable to stop, Daniel rushed to the scene where the car had crashed, and the scene he witnessed made him unable to contain his emotions. His mother, Phyllis, lay motionless on the ground, her beautiful face now covered in wounds, while the car was still burning in the distance. Seeing his mother lying motionless, blood flowing from her forehead, Daniel was paralyzed. He could not believe what was happening. He knelt down beside his mother, his trembling arms hugging her, screaming in despair. "Mom! Mom! No! Don't let this happen to you!" Daniel cried out in despair. Pain and fear filled his heart. His mother, the strong woman he had always looked up to as a role model, was now lying there, unable to move, in a state beyond redemption. Phyllis, meanwhile, was still in a coma, unable to respond to her son's calls. The severe injuries on her body, especially the one on her forehead, left her weak and helpless. She couldn't breathe, couldn't speak, and could only feel her son's presence, although she couldn't respond to him. Daniel, in that situation, tried his best to stay calm. He took out his phone and called the emergency services in a panic. While waiting, he could only hold his mother in his arms, praying for her survival. In that desperate moment, Daniel couldn't think of anything other than Phyllis's life. The stress in her personal life, the troubles she had faced all this time, all seemed insignificant compared to the harsh reality he was facing. The police and fire department arrived shortly after, but Phyllis still didn't wake up. Daniel watched the scene in pain, unable to do anything but witness his mother's despair. The ambulance loaded Phyllis into the ambulance, and Daniel watched the ambulance, praying that she would wake up and not have to leave him. When they arrived at the hospital, Phyllis was still in critical condition, and the doctors immediately took her to the emergency room. Daniel sat in the hospital hallway, his mind racing, his thoughts unable to focus on anything other than his mother's life. He couldn't understand why it had happened. His mother's death would be an insurmountable shock, a terrible pain he couldn't imagine. While Phyllis was in critical condition, the events that had come before, including her firing by Billy, had taken a huge psychological toll on her. Phyllis's mental breakdown began to become more apparent than ever. Broken relationships, lost jobs, and the feeling of having nothing left to cling to had left her in a state of despair. But no one expected that this accident would be a fateful turning point, pushing her to the brink of life and death. And now, all Daniel can do is wait, praying that his mother can survive. The question is not only whether she can overcome this accident, but also whether she can find the mental strength to face the challenges in life after everything has changed. She sat there, in a cold and empty space, with trembling hands holding the phone, preparing to call Daniel, the person she always expected to understand and comfort her in this moment. But the thought of him only made her more confused. Daniel was no longer as close to her as he had been, the distance was more obvious than ever. He was avoiding her, and she could feel it from his short, uncaring answers. However, when Phyllis saw Billy Abbott appear at her office door, a small glimmer of hope flashed in her eyes. Billy had been a close friend for a long time, and although their relationship had had its ups and downs, Phyllis had always believed that Billy would be the one to help her when she was in trouble. She stood up, hurried towards him, and exclaimed, "Billy, I need your help. Will you come with me?" Billy looked at her coldly, but eventually he gave in, sitting down at the table across from her. Phyllis looked at him, knowing that his forgiveness was one of the small hopes she had left. But after a few minutes, Billy's presence no longer provided the comfort Phyllis sought. "Phyllis, you can't keep going like this," Billy said, his voice cautious but firm. "You can't keep dwelling on Daniel. It's only going to make things worse." Phyllis stiffened, Billy's words hitting her like a slap in the face. She thought Billy would be the one to help her through this mess, but instead, he only made the pain more acute. She sighed, her hands resting on the table, a feeling of helplessness spreading through her. Billy continued, "Phyllis, it's time for you to face the truth. All you're doing is wasting your time. Daniel isn't coming back, and Abbott Communications has no place for you." Phyllis felt Billy's words piercing her heart like a sharp knife. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Billy Abbott, the man she had trusted all these years, was now the one pushing her away. The feeling of betrayal overwhelmed her. "Billy, don't do this," Phyllis almost pleaded. I'll change. I can do better. Give me another chance." Billy was silent for a few seconds, his gaze unwavering. Finally, he spoke, his voice firm and unwavering, "Phyllis, you need to go. I've made my decision. You must leave Abbott Communications." Phyllis was speechless. She could only look at Billy with a blank gaze, as if the world around her had collapsed. Everything she had done all this time, all the efforts to maintain her position, suddenly no longer mattered. She stood up, her heart heavy, preparing to face the reality that she had lost everything. As soon as she left the office, a feeling of unease settled over her. She decided to call Daniel, hoping to find some comfort from him, even if it was just a small word of encouragement. But when the phone connected, she didn't receive the warmth she expected. "Daniel," she began, her voice hoarse, "Billy just fired me. I don't know what to do." Daniel was silent on the other end of the line for a long time, and then he finally spoke, but his voice was cold, without any pity. "Phyllis, you knew this would come. You can't keep holding on to the past. You need to change." Phyllis felt another shock. Daniel was avoiding her, too. She was left alone in a world of betrayal and loneliness. But, despite everything, a part of Phyllis refused to let go. She wouldn't let these things defeat her. She will find a way to stand up again, even if she has to face the ultimate hardship. Meanwhile, Sally Spectra, who has been eyeing Phyllis's position, will not sit still. She will not let this opportunity slip away from her. Phyllis has been defeated, and Sally will not miss the chance to take over everything Phyllis has built. She is ready to step into that position and complete her plan. A storm in the Abbott family, decisions, pain, and the cost of failure. Daniel looked into the bathroom mirror, his eyes dreamy, filled with thoughts. Before his eyes was the image of his mother gradually falling into despair, Phyllis. A woman who had always been resilient, now only left with painful emotions and a fear of an uncertain future. Billy Abbott, his longtime colleague, had decided to fire Phyllis, and although Daniel knew that his mother could be an unpleasant factor, he still felt frustrated by this decision. He tried to explain to Billy that Phyllis could still change, that things didn't always have to be a merciless battle. But Billy, with his decisive and unyielding personality, made the final decision. Phyllis would no longer be a part of Abbott Communications. However, Daniel still didn't want Phyllis to bear it alone. He knew that his mother needed to face the truth, but he couldn't let her fight alone. He decided to confront Billy with Phyllis, and devised a plan to give his mother a chance. Phyllis will have to find her own way, Daniel told his mother in one conversation. But his words did not ease Phyllis's pain. She knew that Daniel only wanted to help her, but things seemed to be getting out of hand. She nodded, her eyes filled with tears, and then suddenly Daniel mentioned someone who he thought would understand the situation. "There's a friend I think can help us," Daniel said, but didn't go into details, which made Phyllis curious. "But right now, this is just a temporary plan. I think I can handle everything." Phyllis had no choice but to wait. And while she was waiting for Daniel to change, Mariah returned from her business trip to Cassidy first. When she walked in, the atmosphere instantly became warmer, and Tessa, whom she loved, could barely contain her excitement at seeing Mariah again. Mariah walked into the room, saw Tessa, and immediately hugged her. They both looked at each other in joy, but Mariah couldn't help but remember the past. "Mom, I hugged Aria Porter Copeland like the world was ending, and I just wanted to hug you again," Mariah said, her voice tinged with sadness. Tessa sensed something in Mariah's words, but she still tried to maintain a cheerful demeanor. "You know, I'm just happy to see you back," Tessa replied, but a part of her felt uneasy. Mariah hurried off to work but not before leaving Tessa a sweet kiss. Phyllis walked into Tessa's office with a tense expression. She looked around, sensing the tension in the room, but when she saw Daniel leave his coat on the table, she recognized Tessa as the one who was supporting her son. Phyllis, in her panic, knew that she couldn't rely on Daniel alone to save the situation. She knew she needed Tessa's help, someone who could help her convince Daniel and Billy that Phyllis deserved a second chance. "Tessa, you're the only one who can help us," Phyllis said in a pleading voice, her eyes red. She was in a desperate situation. Not only had she lost her job, she had also lost the position she had worked so hard to build over the years. Phyllis had nothing left to lose, and she believed that Tessa could be the one to help her restore it all. After this meeting, Phyllis left the office and decided to go to the park to relax, but inside, the storm continued to rise. She felt like she was lost in a world that had no place for people like her. There were times when she felt so frustrated that she didn't want to continue living this life anymore. At this moment, Daniel found Billy at the sports club, determined to confront his old friend about firing Phyllis. The two were no longer as friendly as before, and the conversation between them turned into a tense confrontation. "Billy, you can't do that to my mother," Daniel said, his voice filled with anger. "Phyllis can change, you can't keep treating her like this." Billy stood opposite Daniel, his face as cold as ice. "Daniel, I've made my decision, and it's final," he affirmed, unmoved. "Phyllis has had her chances. Now, it's her turn to find her own way." Daniel felt a strong shock. He knew that Billy was a tough guy, but he couldn't understand why his friend could do this to Phyllis. Although Daniel wanted to keep his mother's job, he finally understood that not every battle can be won, and sometimes, one has to accept defeat. Phyllis, in despair, could only watch as the world turned its back on her. But she couldn't let things end like this. No matter how difficult it was, she wouldn't give up. She would find a way to rise from this ruin, no matter what. Facing the truth, complicated relationships and competitive relationships. Sally Spectra could not have imagined that the afternoon when she accidentally met Audra on the street would turn into a tense and explosive encounter. The two, who had had complicated relationships in the past, were now at an important crossroads. It was not only a clash of two strong personalities, but also a silent battle over power, wisdom, and greed. When Sally saw Audra standing near the coffee shop, she could not help but approach. At first, the meeting seemed like a coincidence, a brief interaction between two old friends who had not seen each other for a long time. However, not long after, things gradually took a different turn. "Sally, I didn't expect to see you here," Audra said, her voice slightly cold. She looked Sally up and down, not hiding her annoyance. Sally felt a little awkward, but still tried to act natural. "Oh, me too. It's definitely been a while since we've talked," she said, smiling. Sally immediately thought of a joke she'd heard from Holden recently. She knew that Audra probably wouldn't like to hear about him, but because she sensed the tension in the air, she blurted it out. "Holden once told a funny story about an awkward situation at work. I couldn't help but laugh when he told it." Audra didn't smile, on the contrary, she frowned slightly, clearly not liking the story Sally had just told. She quickly replied, her tone quiet but no less sharp, "Sally, I don't think that's a joke. Holden isn't someone you can make fun of." Sally noticed Audra's attitude and quickly realized that she was feeling uncomfortable. "Oh, I'm so sorry, Audra. I didn't mean to offend. It's just, I thought it was funny." Audra took a deep breath, as if to calm herself. "It's okay," she said shortly, her gaze still cold. "But I don't want to talk about Holden anymore. Actually, I want to talk about Lily's accusations about him, and what I'm hiding." Sally could see that this meeting was no longer a social conversation. She realized that Audra was under a lot of pressure, and it seemed like her secrets with Holden were still there, like a time bomb ready to explode. "I understand completely, Audra," Sally said softly. "If you want to share, I'm willing to listen. If you need me, I can be your confidant about your true past with Holden. I know there are times when we can't tell other people, but you can trust me." Audra looked at Sally for a moment, thought for a moment, and then sighed. "Thanks, but I don't want to talk about Holden anymore," she said, then her eyes moved to another topic. "Actually, I want to know about Billy and Phyllis." Sally was a little surprised. She hadn't expected Audra to bring up Billy and Phyllis, but there was no denying that it was an interesting topic. "Oh, this," Sally said, and then continued. "Billy gave Phyllis an ultimatum. He told her to stop what she was doing or she would be fired from Abbott Communications. Phyllis certainly didn't take that lightly, but she had no choice." Audra listened with interest, but part of her seemed displeased. "So what do you think Billy will do?" she asked, her face challenging. "He'll fire Phyllis on the spot, right?" Sally nodded, her expression serious. "Maybe, but I don't think he'll do it right away. Billy isn't someone who makes decisions easily. He'll give Phyllis another chance, but there are some things to consider." Audra was impatient, urging Sally on. "So what are you going to do? Are you going to stay out of this or are you going to join in?" Sally couldn't help but smile, but it was a slightly sarcastic smile. "I'm certainly not the type to play dirty, Audra," she replied, her voice firm. "If I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it my way." Audra lifted her chin, unable to hide her satisfaction. "Then why don't you consider all the benefits you could get from working with Billy at Abbott Communications? There are definitely bigger benefits." Sally was silent for a moment, thinking about Audra's suggestion. Indeed, if she cooperated with Billy, it would be a great opportunity. However, Sally knew that every decision had its price. She could not risk everything just for a temporary benefit. Finally, Sally spoke up, her voice firm and resolute. "Audra, I will not let myself be drawn into this power game. If there is a chance to cooperate, I will decide in my own way. No one can force me to do anything I do not want to do."